From inside the Banner offices along the Inner Harbor, it is the Banner Ravens podcast. Paul Mancano and Jonas Shaffer adorning our sweaters because today is the first cold day of the early fall. We are here live on a Thursday in October to preview the Ravens Week 6 game against the Washington Commanders. We're also going to talk about the MVP buzz that Lamar Jackson is already generating and heard a little bit of a rumor about a Ravens assistant coach maybe being eyed as a head coaching candidate. But first, the Banner Ravens podcast is brought to you by Toyota. Toyota has been building a legacy of excellence for years. From developing hybrid technology to upping the standard of safety and efficiency, Toyota is always innovating, always making progress. And with a superior lineup of in-stock SUVs, including the adventure-ready RAV4 and capable, affordable Corolla Cross, you can experience the legacy of Toyota for yourself. Visit buyatoyota.com, the official website for deals, to find out more. Toyota, let's go places. All right, Jonas, before we even get into the Lamar Jackson MVP talk, before we talk about Todd Monken being viewed as a head coaching candidate, let's talk about the Ravens' addition to their coaching staff, bringing back an old friend in Dean Pease. He's brought back to serve as a senior advisor to Zach Orr's staff. Zach Orr actually played under Dean Pease for 3 seasons. And of course, you remember Dean Pease for being the Ravens defensive coordinator from 2012 to 2017. Won the Super Bowl, then retired after that depressing Week 17 loss that eliminated the Ravens from the playoffs. Then unretired like a minute later to be the defensive coordinator in Tennessee for 2 years, Atlanta for 2 years. He's 75 years old. He's been through a lot. He's seen a lot. He is back as an advisor now under Zach Orr.
Yeah, I think if you're Zach Orr, the goal is to just keep him from retiring for a 4th time as long as possible.
Did he retire after, again, quote unquote, after Tennessee?
He's retired 3 times.
Is it just a way to get out of a contract? Is that what it is? Or a way to gracefully exit when you don't want to be fired?
I think it's a way to get flowers.
Zay?
Not Zay. I knew I regretted that immediately when I said flowers. Yeah, I mean, I think, some guys in this business like attention. They have a bit of an ego.
Some guys in our business like attention too.
Dean Pease, come on the podcast. We will flower you. We will shower you with flowers and attention. But I mean, listen, the premise for the early part of the show is just like, are these moves stupid?
Yeah.
Are they sensible? I think at this point, things probably couldn't be going worse for the pass defense specifically. So why not bring in some outside help? Why not, be able to call on the play calling experience of someone who's been around the block, who's been around good defenses. Obviously, when the Ravens had their offseason exodus this offseason, it wasn't just Mike McDonald who left, but it was Denard Wilson. It was Anthony Weaver. None of those guys would have really been able to provide a whole lot of play calling experience, but they were still there. They were still, the adults in the room in terms of just their experience, their seniority with this John Harbaugh staff. And, we don't really know what Dean Pease is going to offer. It's going to be all behind closed doors. We saw him at practice yesterday. He's obviously an older guy at 75, still able to, have some pep in his step, still able to be moving around. He's going to have a role on game days. Apparently he's going to be sitting in on meetings. He's going to be there at practices. Pass defense is probably one of the most disappointing units in the NFL. The only thing I would raise is that those last 2 years in Atlanta, I think it was like the 27th ranked pass defense by DVOA and 31st ranked pass defense by DVOA. So it's not like you are bringing in a guy who has had that magic pixie dust that he can sprinkle on a defense and boom, magically turn things around. So we'll see. I mean, regardless of what happens, maybe a turnaround was always going to come. Maybe a turnaround was never going to come, but at least shake things up, at least bring someone in who has an experience, not just with Zach Orr, but with John Harbaugh as well.
Yeah. What I like about Dean Pease is, first off, his name is a full sentence, but also he does bring that level of experience for a defensive coordinator that frankly is wet behind the ears. I mean, he is 31, 32 years old, was a player as recently as Dean Pease was a defensive coordinator in Baltimore. So he has a lot on his shoulders, and the Ravens defensive coaching staff lost 2 of the Mike McDonald's top lieutenants. So he has had a lot to handle. And as we've talked about a million times on this podcast, Mike McDonald's first introduction to being a defensive coordinator in the NFL did not go well. So Zach Orr experiencing the kind of struggles he has with this defense is not a sign of concern, but this is clearly a move that John Harbaugh or Eric DeCosta is making because they want to give their young defensive coordinator help. I don't think this is one of those situations where they're grooming a veteran coach to replace the inexperienced one. I think they still have belief and faith that Zach Orr will turn this around, but they're saying, hey, maybe you should put some training wheels back on just for now, and we'll get you through this. I don't think this is a panic situation where the Ravens are going to fire Zach Orr midseason and replace him with Dean Pease, especially because the last couple seasons for Dean Pease in Atlanta, he was okay, and
Right.
in Tennessee he was okay. Atlanta he was not so good.
Yeah, and I think it's probably also an acknowledgement from the higher ups at the castle, from Steve Bisciotti on down, that this could be a really special season, and if it's worth throwing a little extra money, I mean, like it is not a cheap proposition to bring in a guy with his experience, with his resume, and be an advisor. That it's not like you're getting paid to be a greeter at Walmart. This is good money that we're talking about. So I think to have the buy-in from ownership that this is something that could accelerate the process of Zach Orr becoming a Mike McDonald level coordinator or a step down from that, then I think that's important. I think that's relevant. And listen, what else do you have to lose at this point?
Right.
There's been no reports about dissent or conflict within the Ravens coaching staff. Hopefully, Dean Pease doesn't come in and shake things up in a bad way. But maybe if you put some of these guys outside the comfort zone, get them to see the bigger picture in a way that they're not, then there could have some real trickle down benefits to this defense. And Lord knows that they will need it this week because in comes the NFL's highest scoring offense.
Yeah, I mean, after this week, hopefully it gets a little bit better because we've talked about that gauntlet of the first 5 weeks, and now we can add the juggernaut that is the Jaden Daniels-led Washington Commanders to that list. But the Ravens are just facing an absurd number of high-level quarterbacks this season, not just in the first 6 weeks. I mean, Mahomes, they've already faced Burrow once. They're going to face him again. Josh Allen, Dak Prescott, Justin Herbert. Now Jaden Daniels is looking like a star already. And then you've got still quality quarterbacks like Baker Mayfield and Jalen Hurts. This is a very, very difficult first place schedule where top quarterbacks are going to be coming to Baltimore frequently this season. And we've seen the Ravens defense struggle because of that. The Ravens opposing quarterbacks are 8th in quarterback rating. Ravens are have already given up 23 explosive pass plays so far this season, which is second most in the NFL. So I think part of their regression has been due to the number of high-level quarterbacks that they're facing, but it also doesn't get easier this week, and the Ravens cannot be putting up the kind of statistics defensively that they have.
Yeah. Ninth highest schedule by opposing offense, according to FTN. Nothing on FTN about the future scheduling, but it was interesting to me when these rankings come out. We talked. I think I was a little bit pessimistic. I kind of poo-pooed the notion that this Ravens would have this gauntlet of a schedule because I just feel like it's always so tough to look into the future and just see that this is going to be a legit gauntlet of teams. But the Ravens have like the 23rd ranked schedule over the rest of the season, so that is a lot more forgiving than these first 5 or 6 weeks have been. So that is something to perhaps be optimistic about as you look forward, and maybe there is a easier runway for this team to get some confidence, for this team to iron out whatever defensive issues they have in the defensive backfield. And then, again, as we've seen in 2019, as we saw last year, this team could really be rolling heading into the playoffs, assuming that they get there.
Yeah. Another stupid or sensible topic that we got to discuss is the early season Lamar Jackson MVP hype yet again. And Jonas, I know you're not a big fan of this because boy, is it early in the season. And look back last year, I don't think really any of us had Lamar Jackson near the top of the list. And then he ended up outlasting all of the other candidates, having the best overall season and winning the MVP. But you look at his stats right now, Jonas, compared to last year, and we are 5 games in. Let's extrapolate those stats. Let's say that he is healthy. He played 16 games last year. Remember, he sat for the final game. compiled a 13-3 record, 67% completion. He was throwing for 230 yards a game. He finished with 24 passing touchdowns, 7 interceptions, 102.7 rating, and 51 rush yards per game. It's a lot of numbers. This season, on pace for a 10-7 record, 65% completion, 241 passing yards, so more, 29 passing touchdowns more, 3 interceptions fewer, and 73 rushing yards per game. They're better numbers. He is on pace for better numbers. That doesn't mean he's going to put up those better numbers. Doesn't mean he's going to stay healthy the entire season and be able to do that. But it is ridiculous the kind of start that he has been on here.
I think those stats that you mentioned would put him on pace. I believe I saw this yesterday for a 4,000 passing yard season, 1,000 rushing yard season, which I don't think has ever been done. Maybe like Josh Allen came close or someone random. Like I don't think Michael Vick was ever a good enough passer to do it. But yeah, I mean, this is silly season when it comes to MVP talk. I mean, like even as late as like week 15 last year, Dak Prescott was the easy NFL MVP favorite, and then he has the bad game against Dallas, and Lamar just keeps on cooking, and
Miami, I think.
Yeah, I mean the odds right now have Lamar as the co-second favorite with Josh Allen at plus 600 on DraftKings. Mahomes is obviously the favorite, and what's interesting is that I think typically you look back at just how these MVP awards have been decided. Typically, if you are like the highest point getter in fantasy football, that has a very strong correlation with you getting the MVP.
That's
and Lamar,
sad.
I mean, it makes sense. You got to, contributing passing touchdowns, rushing touchdowns, passing yards, rushing yards. And I think Lamar is the highest scorer in fantasy right now. So shout out to everyone who got Lamar in whatever round you did. But they are, basically 3 games behind the Chiefs right now.
Yeah.
The Chiefs have a defense that looks like it's built to sustain over the course of a 17-game season. If the Chiefs go out and add a splashy wide receiver, that offense, which has not been exactly thrilling to watch, is still an efficient unit because of Patrick Mahomes. They should get back Isaiah Pacheco. It's really, really tough to win MVP when you're not the best player on the best team in the conference. And, CJ Stroud and the Texans might catch fire and, finish ahead of the Ravens. So unless this is a situation where Lamar is just carrying this team on his back and the defense is like a bottom 10 unit, but the offense is just the same kind of force it has been for the first 5 weeks, it's hard for me to see, just because of the narrative force that some of these awards take on.
Yeah.
Him jumping a Mahomes or even a Josh Allen if Buffalo gets back on its heels.
Back on
its feet.
Out of curiosity, if you still have the odds at your disposal here, Jonas, do you know where Derrick Henry might fill into those odds?
Would it be like 20-1?
Maybe. I mean, he's got to be on there.
Oh, you were.
I'm just wondering. Yeah, because we saw Christian McCaffrey for a lot of last season generate a lot of MVP conversation, and a running back is just not going to win it in today's NFL. Last one, Adrian Peterson, probably. So
yeah, I think so.
It's not going to happen, but it also does speak to how many guys right now already are feasting in this offense, that you have a quarterback and a running back that are probably going to be generating NFL MVP buzz. All right, let's get into Todd Monken, because he has been mentioned when a team has fired its head coach already after starting the season 2-3. Definitely not Aaron Rodgers' fault. Definitely blame the coach in that instance, who's never had complete control over his organization. After Robert Saleh was fired by the New York Jets, ESPN's Jeremy Fowler mentioned Todd Monken as a hot head coaching candidate. And Jonas, we talked about him during last coaching cycle when Mike McDonald was hired by Seattle. He was being discussed because of what he did with Lamar Jackson, turning him into an MVP. I mean, not turning him into, returning him to MVP form.
Yeah.
In just his first year in Baltimore. Already good results so far through 5 weeks here. He's being discussed. Do you think he's should be in that conversation?
Yeah, I think it's inevitable. He had a top 5 offense last year. They are a top 1 offense this year. If you look at DVOA, and there is nothing more prized in the NFL than a offensive coordinator who has had a multiple year run now of putting out good offenses. I mean, it's not just what he's doing in Baltimore. It's obviously what he did at Georgia, 2 national championship teams, turned Stetson Bennett into a really, really good college player with there's not a whole lot of great talent from those Georgia teams that I think are kind of popping off in the NFL right now. So a guy who's been able to do a lot with good talent, but not great talent. And, I think it's not like Todd Monken would resist an opportunity to become head coach. I think every coordinator in the NFL, with maybe the exception of a few guys, want to have that head job. It's the prestige, it's the money, it's the chance to run your own show. And this is just something that Ravens fans are going to have to deal with for as long as this offense is cooking, as long as Lamar is looking like an MVP favorite. It's going to be, well, who's calling the plays, who's doing the opening game trips that are giving the Ravens these early leads. It's Todd Monken, it's Todd Monken, it's Todd Monken. So it's just a fact of life in the NFL that offensive coordinators do not stay long in one spot for very long, because they're either getting fired or they're getting a promotion somewhere. I think someone on Reddit pointed out that after the 2023 playoffs, since 2022, so basically over those 2-season stretch, every single NFL team had to replace their offensive coordinator. So that the Ravens have had Todd Monken for even 2 years is a little bit of an anomaly.
Yeah, I mean, either because they're getting hired away or they're getting fired. It is also similar to the MVP conversation, very, very early to be discussing this, because the Jets already named their defensive coordinator as their interim head coach. I can't imagine that they would pull a Colts and just hire somebody midseason away from the Ravens, and I don't think Todd Monken would do that. But similar to that MVP conversation, it's early, because at this point last year we were mentioning names of guys that didn't end up getting hired. I mean, Ben Johnson was the hottest name probably on the coaching market last year, and he took himself out of the running for that Washington job. Mike McDonald was being discussed all year, and he got hired pretty late in the process by Seattle. There was a tense week there where we thought, are the Ravens going to get him back?
Well, because I think Seattle had forgotten or hadn't put in to request him early in the process, and then they couldn't because the Ravens just kept on winning.
Yes.
So the Seahawks front office officials, I think, later said that they were hoping and praying that the Ravens would lose to the Chiefs, and guess what? They got their wish.
There we go. And Bobby Slowick, another guy, the Texans offensive coordinator, who didn't end up getting hired. So stuff can change a lot, and I do think Mike McDonald benefited a lot from the Ravens' defensive performance against the Chiefs in that AFC Championship game. But by the same token, maybe some teams looked at the Ravens' poor offensive performance in that game and said, maybe Todd Monken's not quite as good right now as we think.
Yeah.
But some of the guys that I mentioned, Mike McDonald, Bobby Slowick, Ben Johnson, those are all young guys who probably were going to be habitually mentioned as head coaching candidates. I think Ben Johnson's going to get a head coaching job if he wants it this offseason. Yep. If the Texans offense continues to produce, Bobby Slowick could get another job. Offensive coordinators are in high demand. I think Todd Monken at this point in his career would definitely, like you said, most guys are going to take a head coaching job if it's offered to them. But I think Todd Monken would especially jump at that opportunity, as he should, because it's rare.
Yeah, and I think there is this instinct when you get to these head coaching cycles to think about what a hire could mean for, like, how it fits neatly into the trend of where NFL offenses are headed or NFL defenses are headed. And you think about what this Ravens offense has done this year with heavy personnel, and you think about what Todd Monken did at Georgia with Brock Bowers and Darnell Washington. Like, NFL defenses are getting smaller, they're getting faster. So then what is the counterpunch to that? It's to have personnel where it's a Pat Ricard on the field, a Charlie Kohler on the field, and you are winning and you're getting explosives without necessarily needing 3 or 4 wide receiver splits. It's, obviously it helps to have Derrick Henry, it helps to have Lamar Jackson, it helps to have this offensive line that all of a sudden looks pretty good. But to be able to, I think, credibly go into an interview and say, yeah, we saw the NFL going one way, we thought that we could do it another, and be able to say that gave us an advantage in Baltimore. Imagine what we could do for you in New York or Chicago or wherever. I think that is something that would definitely raise the eyebrows of a lot of ownership groups around the NFL.
Yeah. Well, let's see if Todd Monken's offense can continue to produce again on Sunday. They should, because the Washington Commanders are coming to town. And yes, they boast a high-powered offense led by offensive rookie of the year favorite, Jaden Daniels. But defensively, they're a little bit vulnerable. The over-under on this game is 51.5. Ravens are favored by 6.5 points. This game is being played Sunday at home at 1:00. And the Commanders are 4-1. Yes. But I think the Ravens are the best opponent they will have faced so far, because their only loss of the season came against Tampa Bay in week 1, and then they've racked up wins over the Giants, the Bengals, the Cardinals, and the Browns. So not exactly 4 juggernauts, and I think the Ravens present their toughest challenge.
Yep, none of those teams have a winning record. The Ravens have faced the 10th hardest schedule in the NFL. The Commanders have faced the 7th worst. So this is a step up. I think that they won't be cowed necessarily by coming into Baltimore. And, I mean, the ticket prices for this game are insane. I think there are going to be a lot of Commanders fans with with pretty thick wallets coming to M&T, because you look at the prices, they are just insane on the secondary market. But, they probably their best win of the season was that win of the Cardinals, and that was in Arizona. It's not like, Arizona is the kind of rabid environment that M&T Bank Stadium is going to be on a Sunday afternoon, but still to go in there and to win comprehensively, I think showed everyone that this offense is for real, and maybe this defense is starting to look less like a joke than it was early in the season.
Jonas, what's your word of the day today?
It's Beltway. It's a shout out to the DMV, even though I guess Baltimore doesn't really consider itself part of the DMV. Beltway is the highway skirting an urban area, also the political and social world of Washington, D.C., viewed especially as insular and exclusive. This is the Battle of the Beltway. Battle of the Beltways, I guess, is probably the more accurate.
Yes, because there's a beltway around Baltimore and there's a beltway around DC.
Yeah, and I guess you have a fun fact, Paul, you want to share?
Yeah, I mean, I used to work for Masson, fun fact, and the Battle of the Beltways, it was the battle between the Orioles and the Nationals, and so I would have to make graphics for that, also called the Masson Cup. Which some people, I wanted to create an actual physical Masson Cup, but wasn't to be. But I just remember I had to make graphics, and I would put an Orioles player and a Nationals player, and those two teams, they were kind of in the same competitive cycle for a little bit. They all made the playoffs in 12 and 14 and 16, but then the Orioles go through their rebuild, and the Nats kept winning. And I just remember making one graphic one year that had Juan Soto for the Nats and Hanser Alberto for the Orioles, just to show the dichotomy between those two teams.
I think there is a similar stratification between Orioles Nationals as a rivalry and Ravens Commanders as a rivalry. Just as, I mean, like I think everything that you need to know about how rarely these teams have played is that the last time the Ravens played what is now known as the Commanders, they were known as the Redskins, and then they were known as the Washington Football Team. So this is the third time in as many games that they have faced a Washington football franchise with a different freaking name.
And it could be a different name in 2 years. You don't know.
Yeah. Hopefully it's back to Washington Football Team.
Do you know
Commanders is such a bad name?
Speaking of names, had you ever heard Hanser Alberto's name before today? You had?
Yeah.
Wow. Dude hit 326 for his career against lefties. Absolute lefty masher.
You could be making that up, Paul, and I wouldn't be able to fact check.
Yeah. I mean, I could be wrong, but he could have been useful on this team. All right. I don't think this is, speaking of rivalries, this is one of those where if you have to ask if it's a rivalry, it's not a rivalry. And the fact that they're in different conferences obviously hurts that. But I think that there is some animosity between the fan bases, but they just don't get to share it that often.
I think probably the most interesting part of this is the behind the scenes, behind velvet ropes aspect of this, though, that we don't get to see. I think Dominique Foxworth, who obviously went to Maryland, played for the Ravens, I believe still lives in DC, but was talking, I think, on his podcast a week or two ago about how this was a game that mattered when it was played for all of the street cred that could accrue to you if you are going to a club in a neutral territory or in Washington or in Baltimore. It helps to be on the winning team so that you can have that flex if you happen to find yourself in an establishment with a guy from the other team. There was some talk of that yesterday that, like, yes, these teams are close enough in proximity that it is nice to have those bragging rights, but there's also like so much more, bonhomie and goodwill among these guys because they train together, because they have the same agents. I mean, Isaiah Likely and Mikey St. Russell, the Commanders cornerback, played ball together in high school. So I think there's probably less combative fractiousness between teams that play this close together. And even though we did get that fun fight in training camp last year between the Commanders and the Ravens, it just is like it to me. It just feels like just another game, especially because you were just talking about the gauntlet and how many big games the Ravens have played. It's not like they're going to get up even more for this one than they did against the Chiefs or the Bills in prime time or the Bengals on the road in Cincinnati.
Yeah, there's just not enough of animosity for them to be that excited about this one. All right, there are some injuries on both sides. Ravens, after a very healthy week last week, they have a lot of guys that ended up on Wednesday's injury report. A lot of guys missing from practice. Rashad Bateman with the groin injury, Ronnie Stanley with the toe injury, Marlon Humphrey. You saw him leaving the locker room in Cincinnati in a walking boot, listed as an ankle injury. What did John Harbaugh's level of concern appear to be with these guys?
Pretty low. And maybe he's just playing coy and kind of, playing out the string until we get to that. But yeah, I mean, he was asked Monday about if any of these injuries were serious. He was asked again after Wednesday's practice if the Bateman injury could be serious, because obviously Rashad did have the groin injury that required surgery, I think, his rookie year, and that was a real bummer. And he's playing like a really, really important piece of this offense, and it would definitely stink to not have him for this one. But usually Thursday is the kind of bellwether day, because you get to see, is Rashad Bateman actually out for 2 days in a row? Because
Right.
if he is, then that probably means he's going to be missing for 3 in a row. And if he's missing 3 in a row, you're almost definitely not going to play. So we'll see in about 2 hours time, just where these guys are health wise. But on the other hand, good to see Andrew Voorhees a full participant. He was a full participant last Friday. Didn't obviously get the activation, but just another option for the Ravens if they want to go back to Voorhees at left guard. Maybe they keep McCary at left guard. It seems like Roger Rosengarten has earned himself that starting position at right tackle full time, which obviously kind of leaves you with an interesting decision of what to do in the interior there.
Yeah, and then on the Commanders side, Brian Robinson Jr., the starting running back for the Commanders, got a knee injury. Guard Nick Allegretti, an ankle injury. Defensive end Cleveland Farrell, knee injury. Dante Fowler out with an illness. Austin Eckler also limited with a heel injury. So both teams are hurting at this point. Let's dive into the Commanders' offense, led by Jaden Daniels, because, boy, it has been impressive. Daniels has a 77% completion. He's got 4 passing touchdowns, 2 interceptions, 227 passing yards per game, 300 rushing yards so far, 4 rushing touchdowns. The knock on him coming out of LSU before he was drafted 2nd overall was his age, because he had played a lot of years at Arizona State, LSU, in college, and the fact that he put his body at risk quite a lot. And this is an offensive line that still has given up a fair number of sacks. He is right near, I think he's 11th in sack percentage between Justin Fields and Matthew Stafford, who's behind a very patchwork Rams offensive line. So he is still getting sacked, and the concern for Washington is they got to keep him upright. But he's also, his mobility, I think, was obviously one of his biggest traits, one of his biggest assets coming out of school, because in a similar way, not the same level, obviously, as Lamar Jackson, but in a similar way, he is kind of an escape artist.
Yeah, I mean, I think the funniest bit of like the Jane Daniels draft discourse was just the clips of him throwing himself into SEC defenses like a crash test dummy.
Yeah,
and him being able to live and tell a tale about it. Not really a huge discussion point in this game, but to me, it is funny that these two guys might be like among the skinniest quarterbacks in the NFL, or at least the lightest quarterbacks in the NFL. You think back to the combine and what Jane Daniels didn't do, which was weigh in, because there was such concern around the NFL about how low he might be weight wise that he just put off weighing in until his pro day. And I think the rumors back then were that he was around 205 pounds, which is probably around what Lamar is weighing currently. So that these guys that we've gotten basically 100% snap participation from these guys, despite being very athletic, very run heavy, dual threat quarterbacks, and also pretty frail looking dudes out there. I'm grateful that their injury history has not really kind of reared its ugly head. But yeah, I mean, you talk about just that second play ability. He leads the NFL. Jaden does with 235 scramble yards. That's 8.4 yards per carry. Scrambling on 16.4% of his dropbacks. That's almost twice as often as Lamar. The Ravens have not really been punished too much by scrambling quarterbacks as runners, just 5.2 yards per game allowed. But they have given up 196 yards on passes outside the pocket. Third most in the NFL, you think, of all the explosives that have kind of done them in. There was the 52-yarder to Khalil Shakir from Josh Allen in that Week 4 game. Gardner Minshew finding Devontae Adams for a big play. Minshew finding Brock Bowers for a big play. So it's going to be interesting. I think this Ravens defense was built with the kind of speed that could maybe limit Jane Daniels in a better way than other teams have. But you have to be dialed in at all possible times. You can't let this guy, get into open space and be able to create, because the Ravens defense has been disorganized enough, within 2.5, 3 seconds. If you extend that timeline to like 4 or 5 seconds, I mean, all hell might break loose.
Yeah, I mean, it feels lazy, but I'm going to do it anyway to make the RG3 comparison, because in a very similar way, RG3 came into Washington as the 2nd overall pick, had this incredible running ability, and was able to breathe life into a Washington team that hasn't had a really successful year in a long time, and it looks like they might have their franchise quarterback. RG3 was undone in large part because of injuries.
Yep.
And you just hope that Jaden Daniels doesn't follow that similar path. But I do think right now, Jaden Daniels comes into the NFL partly because of his age as a much more advanced passer.
Yep.
What's impressive to me is he's doing a lot of this without an incredible complement of skill position players. Austin Eckler is, nearing the end of his career.
Looked washed last year.
Yeah. Backside of his career. Terry McLaurin is, a okay number 1 wide receiver, but beyond that, I mean, it's Zach Ertz, who's pretty close to washed at tight end. It's rookie wide receiver Luke McCaffrey, Noah Brown. It's not an incredible depth of talent here. And Cliff Kingsbury, perfect for a guy coming right out of school. Who says he can't still draw up an NFL offense? And I think the knock on Cliff Kingsbury is there's an expiration date with all of his offenses.
Right.
But for right now, he is doing a lot right with having Jaden Daniels at the center of this.
Yeah, and you look at this Commanders team, to me, it like profiles as an offense that, just in terms of stylistically what they do on a down-and-down basis, like, can be real big heartbreakers in a game like this. They are 25th. They have the 25th best offense on first down. So you think, oh, like, the Ravens should do a good job of being able to get these guys in some unfavorable splits later. But they're 4th on second down. They're 1st on third down. On third down, they have not missed a 4th down conversion opportunity. They are 8 for 8 this season.
Wow.
And I think probably the biggest wrinkle in all this is that this is a Commanders team that loves to go up no huddle. They have done it 158 plays this year. That's over 50% of their plays. The next closest team in the NFL, Chicago Bears, with 90. So this team will go turbo, and they will, if they feel like they have you in some questionable personnel, then they're going to try to exploit that. I mean, it was, there was a great clip from Dan Orlovsky a couple of years ago about how the Commanders went up and down the field with like 13 personnel, which is not maybe what you expect. It's, 1 back, 3 tight ends, 1 wide receiver, and yet they're lining up with all these different spread looks and getting good running lanes. They're getting good passing lanes. And, when you have a quarterback as accurate as Jaden Daniels, when you have a running game that's as diverse, an offensive line that's pass blocking and run blocking, as well as the Commanders have, it could be a situation where everything that has really bedeviled the Ravens this year, their communication, their poor downfield coverage.
Yeah.
This could be a really, really, really tough spot for them.
And on the other side of the ball, I want to talk about Fedarian Mathis, not because he's good, but because, have you ever met anybody named, is that how you pronounce it? Fedarian?
I think so.
Is that the best name in the NFL?
Well,
is he the only Fedarian in recorded history?
I did Google this. And I didn't find any other Fedarians.
No, I Googled Fedarian and did minus Mathis. I couldn't find any. It sounds biblical, but
you love your Boolean searches, don't you, Paul?
I do.
When I think of the word, when I think of the name Fedarian, I feel compelled to say it in the way that Notorious B.I.G. was introduced. It's like Fedarian.
Yeah, it's certainly up there.
There are a bunch of other really good first names. None on the Ravens, really, that I can think of.
I mean,
that
Namdi's a cool name.
That's true. Calais was a good one when he was here. But you got Debo, you got Sauce Gardner, you got Lil Jordan Humphrey.
That doesn't count. It's
Lad McConkey.
Lil Jordan, was he actually named Lil Jordan at birth?
I'm not sure, but
There's no way.
that's what he played with at Texas. He got
Yeah.
Divine Diablo, Kool-Aid McKinstry, one of my draft crushes, and then the old timers, DeBrickashaw Ferguson, Clinton Dix.
Is he still in the NFL? Clinton? I don't think so.
Yeah. Shout out to one of my Maryland football heroes back in the day, Leroy Ambush. Do you want to guess what position he played?
He better play pass rush, right?
He was a linebacker.
Nice. Yeah. That's perfect.
Shout out to nominative determinism.
All right. Yes. Mancano means they are missing. So
oh my God,
if nominative determinism is legitimate, then that means I'm going to be missing at some point.
We all do.
I'm going to end up on the side.
We all go missing at some point.
I'm going to end up on the side of a milk carton. All right. The talent up front for the Commanders is pretty solid. Jonathan Allen, Daron Payne, Dorrance Armstrong, but they are weak in terms of the run game and the passing game. Neither of those units has been great so far. 27th in DVOA against the pass, 18th against the rush.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird defense. I think it's a reflection of just not being able to find really any good talent up front. In the draft past couple of years, because you're having to play Bobby Wagner, who's again grading out well on PFF, but every time the Ravens play him, they make him look his age. The
34.
I know, and you think about just how overpowering the Ravens' run game was in that game against Seattle last year. That was another Bobby Wagner defense, and he just had no chance of sticking with Lamar, Keaton Mitchell. Gus Edwards in that game. Cleveland Farrell is starting. He was a former top 5 draft pick who just has not really been able to do anything. Dante Fowler, another former first rounder, starting. Just got a 1-year, $3.25 million deal. Benjamin St. Juste, got torched for Cincinnati, has not been reliable out wide. Emmanuel Forbes was a first round pick last year. Now he barely plays. And even some of the promising young talent they do have, Johnny Newton, still only playing like 30% or 30 or 40% of the snaps up front. Mikey Sandersill, who we're talking about, was a bona fide playmaker in the slot at Michigan, but he's playing more on the outside as a rookie, which is kind of confusing. So it's a group with a bunch of misfit toys. I think it's reflected in just what they've been, where they've struggled, how they've struggled. And I just think the Ravens should feel really, really good about, how they match up against this Commanders offense in the same way that they should have felt really good about how they matched up against the Bengals defense last week.
Let's dive into our preview and our predictions here, Jonas. I think I'm 4-1 in predicting scores so far. I think the only one I missed was the Raiders. But I also didn't add my prediction to our article on the BaltimoreBanner.com, where you can subscribe $1 for 6 months.
For sure.
It was a long week. All right. I was dealing with the Orioles disaster. It was a lot going on. But I did predict on the podcast the Ravens would get the win over Cincinnati, and that ended up being correct. And I'm predicting another win here, Jonas. 30-21 is my final. At some point, Jaden Daniels has to come back down to earth. I still think he's a great player, but there has to be one game in there, right? In his rookie season. I mean, 77% completion for a rookie is unheard of. The kind of stats he is putting up are, there's no precedent for this. I think it's going to come at some point, and this would be an awesome opportunity for the Ravens defense to show, hey, we're still an elite unit. Even though we had some turnover, we're not going to take that much of a step back, and we're going to show a rookie quarterback what life is like in the NFL. I think the Ravens defense does that for the most part, and I think they come away with a 9-point win.
Yeah, I think we have not given enough shine to the Ravens run defense, but this feels like a game where if they pull this out, the run defense will be a big reason why. This is a Commanders offense that is 4th in run DVOA, but they have not faced a run defense anywhere as good as the Ravens. They are allowing 3.1 yards per carry. I think they've allowed, maybe 1 or 2 explosive runs all year. It's obviously a different test for the Ravens because not a lot of quarterbacks are as fast as Jaden Daniels, but I feel like they match up pretty well. And if they can get Jaden Daniels into those 3rd and long situations where they can get a little bit funky with their coverage, if they can, throw a blanket over Terry McLaurin. I'm personally not worried about Zach Ertz. I'm not worried about, Olamide Zaccheaus.
Olamide Zaccheaus.
Thank you.
St. Joe's prep grad.
Okay. I also think that the Ravens should win this one. I have them winning pretty comfortably, 28-17, which is bad news for Ravens fans because I have not done a good job of picking Ravens games. I picked them to lose a couple times in a row now, and they have won a couple times in a row now. To me, this just feels like a repeat of Ravens versus Bills in a lot of ways. You think about the discussion from that Buffalo pregame. It was, can the Ravens run roughshod over this Bills team that refuses to match heavy personnel? Guess what the Commanders refuse to do? They do not play any base personnel. I think they played like 3 snaps in the 4-3 or 3-4 all year. And so if they are doing that, if they are giving up as many explosive runs as they have, I think they've given up the most, runs of 10 plus yards this season. If you can, take advantage of this secondary with play action, which I think the Ravens should be able to. Mark Andrews looks like he's coming on strong. Isaiah Likely, Charlie Kohler, obviously all really important pieces. I just feel like this could be a day where Lamar either has all day to pass or has everywhere to run. And I just feel like it's going to really take a huge Herculean effort from this Commanders team to kind of bow up against this Ravens offense and do things that on paper they just haven't shown the ability to do.
So what's your score prediction?
28-17
Ravens. We did get a comment about from on Apple Podcasts where you can write us a 5-star review. That would be terrific. It was 4 stars, so I can't read the whole thing.
That's
but
the rule.
That's the rule. It's got to be 5 stars, and I'll read it out here on the show. But they did comment about how you very rarely pick the Ravens to win, and you've been burned by it a couple times.
Yeah, well, I've told people fade my picks.
Yeah, they're bad.
They're bad, and also, did I pick the Ravens to lose like once last year after
Yeah, you picked a lot of Ravens wins,
yeah.
and they racked up a lot of wins,
and they were also fairly favored in all of them.
Yes,
I just don't want to be a coward, and I mean, like we talked about this before the Bills game. Like I was going to pick the Ravens if you had picked the Bills, but you picked the Bills, so I had to pick the but you picked the Ravens, so I had to pick the Bills.
That's why I plant my flag first in the Google Doc. Also, Olamide Zaccheaus, the chant for him in high school was Olamide is going to run today. Isn't that great?
That's pretty good.
Yeah, thanks. We will be back on Sunday from M&T Bank Stadium with a post-game podcast for you. In the meantime, read all of Jonas's great work, Gianna Hahn, Kyle Goon on thebaltimorebanner.com, where you can subscribe just $1 for 6 months. A lot of great stuff. Great story from Gianna Hahn this morning about Bo Braid and growing up around here, going back and being a JV assistant coach at his old high school, River Hill.
Get you a rookie safety who can do both.
Yeah. Who's 22 years old and is way more accomplished than either of us will ever be. Please like, rate, review, subscribe, all that good stuff. Thank you so much for tuning in. @Jonas_Shaffer is Jonas's Twitter handle. I'm